Hello, and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm your host, Emma Thomas, and my guest today is Helen Tomlinson. Helen is Head of Talent Development at the Adecco Group, and earlier this year was appointed as the government's first ever Menopause Employment Champion. As part of her voluntary role, Helen will focus on encouraging employers to develop menopause policies to create more supportive environments to help women experiencing menopause to stay and progress in work. Welcome to the podcast, Helen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, unusually for a podcast guest, I did actually get to meet you in person before recording,
I know.
which was lovely. We'll come back to that in a minute as to sort of where we ended up in the same place. But tell us, how did you come to be involved in working in the sort of the menopause space initially?
Well, I suppose it was when I took this role that I'm currently doing. So I moved from my whole career as being in recruitment, talent, employability. So always working to help people develop their career or move along in society, etc. And so I took this job in 2021, and it was my first move into sort of an enabling function, as we call them, working in the talent and development space, and it's now broadened out to include inclusion as well, for the reason that I'm really going to tell you about now. So when I took over the role, the lady that was doing the role before me forwarded all her diary invites, and one of them was to the Gender Forum meeting. I had no idea what that was. I'd come from operations. I hadn't really had any involvement in it, and so I joined the first one, and they were saying, "Oh, we're coming up to World Menopause Day. We need to think about, menopause in the workplace, and who's going to lead on that." And I kind of looked around the virtual room, and I thought, nobody else who could probably add the lived experience, having gone through menopause sort of a couple of years before. I thought, and it was forced menopause because I'd had a hysterectomy, so it was quite challenging. I thought, well, I think I'd better lead on that because I can't see anybody else walking towards
No one's putting
it.
their hand up.
No, absolutely. So I kind of really fell into it. And then on World Menopause Day, I decided we were going to launch our policy. And I laugh about it now when I'm talking to other employers, because I thought, well, this is it. We've got a policy, job done.
Yay.
We've done a great thing. And in hindsight now, when I give talks, etc., I say that all that was the catalyst that opened up the conversation to change the culture of the organisation. So it was a good thing, but it was the longer burn aspect of it that it was the good thing, not necessarily launching the policy. So I fell into it quite accidentally, if I'm honest, and I look back now and I think it's changed, the course of my life, the direction of my career, everything. If somebody had said to me, this is what you will be doing by the end, sort of mid 2023, I would never have believed it, because the kind of the second part of that was that I started lobbying government about menopause policy in the workplace. So at Adecco, where I work, we work with a political PR company, and they said, you need to start talking to government about a menopause policy. I thought, you're right, I do. So I contacted various MPs, and I invited Caroline Harris to come to one of our roundtable events that we were doing, kind of still in COVID, so it was all virtual. We had a roundtable. We had an audience of sort of 300 of our client base, and at the end of it, I just said, if anybody would like me to help them to write their policy, just give me a shout. And it was literally a throwaway line. I hadn't planned on saying that, and for the rest of 2022, that's what I did, helped clients to create their policy. And then I was talking about how you embed a policy, how you really bring it to life, and the management training and the cultural aspect. And that's just the direction that it's taken me in. So it's kind of the best job in the world that I never knew that I wanted. So yeah, it's been incredible.
And yeah, the conversation around menopause has changed seismically, really, in the last sort of 2-3 years even.
Absolutely. No, absolutely it has. I mean, even last week, every week, every Sunday, I think, I wonder what's going to happen this week that's never going to happen to me before. And absolutely, something tops what happened the previous week. But also, the incremental change that we see, that sometimes we think, oh God, this is really hard and there's so much to do and we've got so much further to go. But then when we look at some of the small things that happened. I mean, only last week ago, and I've talked about this a few times this week because I think it's really, and I mentioned it at the event we were at together. Somebody talked to me in a meeting, an internal meeting, and he asked me about my perimenopause experience. And I just thought that would even a year ago, and I know
Mm.
it's a little bit different because I've been very open about my experience in the press, etc. But for somebody to say in the first meeting you've ever had with them to ask them about your perimenopause because it's relevant to him and his wife's experience, I just think that's such a step change that we've had in a relatively short time.
Yeah. And so you were appointed as the Menopause Employment Champion in, I think, March of this year. And you're I mean, essentially, it's you could argue it could be a full-time role in and of itself. So how does that work? How are you kind of balancing that with your work at Adecco? Are you sort of essentially pulling a double shift?
Um, some days, if I'm honest, I am working a long day. However, I am very very lucky that I've worked with the group. I haven't worked with Adecco for my whole career, but a lot of my colleagues have been in the industry, and we've known each other a very very long time. And I do have a very strong team around me, very experienced, both within recruitment, within Adecco, and within L&D. So I've got a lot of opportunity to do what I'm doing, which is phenomenal. I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity. But yeah, I do balance. I have to balance my time, but almost now I couldn't really do one without the other because it's just I'm constantly internally talking about ED&I, menopause, women's health, etc. But then I'm talking about it with clients externally as well. So it really just is part and parcel of my daily conversation. And I guess I'm lucky that I have. I don't know if it's a skill or an ability, but I can switch from one thing to another. So I like change. I like variety. So having a full diary and covering just such a multitude of topics in one day, that's what inspires me and drives me. And I also think that I feel like I'm extremely privileged to be able to be a platform for women who either can't speak up for themselves because they don't have the confidence, they
Mm.
don't have the platform, and they are facing these challenges on a daily basis in roles that probably don't allow them to have that voice. So I always, when I think back to my experience of perimenopause, one of my key symptoms, as I've mentioned before, was really, really heavy periods. That affects 44% of women going through perimenopause. And I had flexibility in my diary. I was in a role where I could pick and choose. Went long before COVID. When I
Mm.
went to the office, I could. I was a sales director. I could plan my own time, but I'm doing this for women who have to show up every day and don't have the choice. So my best friend is a nurse in accident and emergency. She's got no choice but to be there every day through COVID, head to toe in PPE. That's not
Mm.
a great situation. I've got a friend who is a classroom assistant. She's no choice but to show up. And those people who work on the front line, work in the emergency services, work in a caregiving role, work in the retail sector, where they have no choice but to be there, and the impact that perimenopause and menopause have on them.
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget, isn't it? That kind
Mm.
of spectrum of, it's great, and we'll kind of come back and talk about, maybe some of the ways that workplaces can be more supportive, but obviously not all workplaces and not all roles are created equal, and so there will be a limit sometimes to what employers
Absolutely.
can do. What are some of the changes that you would like to see happen, ideally, over the next sort of 2 to 3 years to sort of that companies can be doing to support their employees better?
I think the biggest thing is the cultural change and the open conversation. And I suppose there's three things. So the cultural conversation is, I think that's a powerful one, because actually when I'm delivering workshops to either clients or internally in the business, what that means is the way that I'm talking to them about empathetic conversation and safe space conversation, that can be applied to any topic. We encourage through our ED&I strategies that people can bring their whole self to work. So whatever that looks like for them, whatever that means that they need to be able to empowered to have those conversations. We have to make sure that line managers and other supporting people in organizations have the ability and capability to take receipt of those conversations. So that empathetic listening, that support is brilliant with regard to menopause, but it applies to any
Mm,
topic as well. So that education piece and cultural piece, and the way we tackled menopause in our organisation became the blueprint for how we opened up the conversation about pretty much any topic that you want to overlay. So that has opened up opportunity. We kicked it off with menopause, but now we have network groups for topics such as domestic abuse, pregnancy loss, men's mental health. We talk about period management in the workplace, all topics that are quite challenging for people. We
mm,
start it all off with lived experience, education, and support. So that cultural piece, that's what I would like to see. The other aspect of it is the sharing of best practice. So I was delighted, obviously, to meet you really briefly at the launch of the British Standards Institute menstrual health, menstruation, and menopause in the workplace standard, for a couple of reasons. The fact that it's really broad and it talks about menstrual health and menstruation, I think is really important, because that opens up the conversation across the demographics in the
yeah,
workplace. So we have got 5 generations in our workplace, and as have many organisations. But the average age of a girl starting her periods is reducing all the time. So it's at 10 now. When I
really.
started mine, it was at 13. So you've only got a certain number of cycles. So that means the average age of perimenopause will start to come down, and menopause. So you're broadening out that conversation by including, period management, periods in the workplace, maternity, endometriosis, polycystic ovary, all those different broad women's health conversation is opening it up to different people, so it's more inclusive. So I think that's a real step forward. The other aspect of that, obviously, is it's a free standard, so any
Mm.
employer can download it and start to make changes in their organisation around those topics. So that's a great thing.
Yeah, and it's incredibly comprehensive. And I'll make sure that I
Absolutely.
put links in the show notes. Like if somebody wanted to start a conversation around this in their own workplace, they that perhaps is one of the most impactful things they could do, is to
It
share
really
that
is.
that resource with somebody in their organization, and kind of get just have them read it, think about the sort of the parts of that they
Absolutely.
could implement in their own workplace.
I totally agree. And that brings me to the third aspect of what I'd like to see. So it's the cultural shift around conversation that I'd like to see, the broadening of the conversation around women's health to make it more inclusive across the generations in the
Mm,
workplace. And the third thing is about that sharing of best practice and free resource. So part of my strategy in the role is to provide a portal for employers to share that best practice. So I'm focused on 5 sectors, which are adult social care, retail, hospitality, manufacturing, and professional and technical, and looking at those sectors top down, bottom up, because a lot of those sectors have multiple sectors within them. So some really large organisations can actually cover 3 or 4 sectors because of the nature of what they do. But looking at those sectors, because the challenges in one sector can be very different from the challenges in another. But I
Sure.
want to look at them so that, as an example, in hospitality, if you work in a large organisation that's really forward thinking, has a brilliant ED&I strategy, has a menopause policy, has, shares best practice, does really good things for their employers, why should you not have access to that if you choose to work for a small hotel on the south coast? And it may be that you don't get access to that because you haven't got an HR department, you haven't got anybody to talk to. So that sharing a free resource is really important, and that will be housed on a portal that government are making available to me to be able to do that, which is brilliant. The second aspect of that, again, is completely free of charge to any employer, but a lot of large organisations have allyship programs. They have menopause champions, they have menomates and things like
Hmm.
that. But again, small organisations, 99% of organisations in the UK are SMEs. 3/5 of the workforce
Mm.
work for an SME. So if you don't have access to the
They just won't
support
have the
network,
same resources, the time to invest
absolutely.
in those big
Yeah. So
programs.
a national allyship program. So, as an example, if I work, in a small independent retailer, and my manager is a, a, a male, and I don't feel I can approach him, I've nobody to talk to, I feel isolated, I can be linked up with somebody in a large retail organisation. A lot of employers do it internally. This is just taking
Mm.
it
Ah,
externally
that's
and
amazing.
linking people up. So that sharing of care, support, understanding, and resource that's free of charge, regardless of your HR budget, regardless of the size of your business. That's the second aspect that we will be linking up with. There's 2 others.
And is there a sort of a rough time scale as to when some of that will start to become available?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to produce a report after my first 6 months on my findings, who's doing the good stuff, how they can share it, etc. And that has been absolutely phenomenal to be able to. I've probably spoken to more people in the last 6 months than I've spoken to in my entire career, all sandwiched into that 6 months. But it's been amazing to see what employers are doing. So we'll produce that report. Then we're starting a series of roundtable events in September, which will share that best practice and lead to it being put on the portal later this year.
Great. That all sounds amazing. What sort of pain points are you hearing from the companies that you're speaking to? And like you say, you're talking to sort of small and large companies, but what are they kind of coming up against?
I think I'll take that in 2 parts. So I think in the smaller organisations, the SMEs, it comes back to that. And I've had a lot of experience with talking to individuals where they've said, I don't know how to approach my manager. There's only 3 of us. I
Mm,
don't really want him to know. I feel really uncomfortable. What can I do? So I hear a lot of that, or I think I'm going to have to leave because I'm nobody to talk to.
yeah.
And then in the larger organisations, it is a little bit. There are 4.4 million women have left work due to menopause, and that is really a lot of those women are in professional roles. I mean, it is literally just a perfect storm, isn't it? That the average age of a woman going into perimenopause is 41, menopause is 51. The average age of a woman going into a C-suite role in a FTSE 500 is 51. So, we talk about the sandwich generation, we talk about career aspiration, we talk about women having children later in life facing the glass ceiling. This is the second glass ceiling. And all of those headwinds coming together, no wonder women are feeling, challenged in those senior roles. But also, it's the experiences. I tie it back to what I talked about when I was perimenopausal and I could manage my own diary. And so the practical aspects, the physical aspects of it were actually, whilst debilitating and not very pleasant, were manageable. it's the loss of confidence, the brain fog, of which that was just a fantastic example, just then. The loss of confidence, the brain fog, the not sleeping, the impact of that, the anxiety.
Mm.
That's why women in more senior roles are leaving the
It's
workplace.
hidden away. It's not as well understood.
Yeah, exactly. And that's harder to articulate, but it's
Mm.
also harder for the employer to do anything about because, we talk about reasonable adjustments, and my nervousness around reasonable adjustments is twofold. That actually, for something like loss of confidence, it's a very internalized thing, isn't it?
Mm.
You can't really say to an employer, so what reasonable adjustment are you going to provide for me, because this is what I'm facing. So that comes back to that cultural piece, that understanding, that support, and that being able to say, I hear you, I understand, and let's try and work together to make sure you feel, that you can carry on in your career without actually being able to provide anything tangible and physical. And the other part of it is that very often and this isn't just a gender thing, but very often when men are faced with a problem, they want to immediately go to a practical solution
Yeah.
because that helps, in their mind, helps the situation. There's been a lot of research into men's mental health, and the talking aspect of it doesn't help. It's the practical solution. So overlay that into this scenario, and often it can be that immediately want to go into solution mode and make it better, and that's brilliant. But actually, in doing that, it can often make the situation worse. So I'll give you an example that when I was perimenopausal, I worked for a different organisation. I had an office that was all glass. So you can imagine in the summer, it was like a greenhouse anyway. I was also having hot flushes at that time. And so after I mentioned it casually to my line manager, who was a man, it was a predominantly male organisation. And one morning I came in and he got me a fan on a stand, but he put a sticker on the fan that said, Helen's fan, do not move, which was great because now I have my own fan. However, everybody was coming in. Every time somebody came in, they were like, why have you got a fan? And I haven't got a fan. I'm hot as well. So how come you've got a fan? So I kept having to repeat the fact that I was perimenopausal. I was struggling with hot flushes. And that was fine. But had I not,
It was fine for you, but for somebody else, it might have
it would have
been tipped them
absolutely
over the edge.
destroyed somebody's confidence
Mm.
totally. And then to add to that, every time I went to a meeting, I had to take my fan with me, plug it
Like
in.
an IV drip, rolling it down the corridor.
Exactly. It was like when you see people standing outside a hospital having a cigarette with an IV dripping. That's what I felt
Like,
like.
might as well have a big sign over your head saying
Exactly that.
perimenopausal woman
So
approaching.
So my point was that if I'd been a different person, that could have really destroyed my confidence and, made me feel really embarrassed in front of people, etc.
Mm.
So don't assume that you know what the reasonable adjustment is without having the
Yeah.
conversation. That is a really key thing for me, that, women feel that they are not being, they might be being supported, but not necessarily in the right
Mm.
way.
It's so individual, isn't it?
It
It's about
absolutely is.
going to that person as an individual, finding out what's
Yeah,
happening for them, finding out what, asking them how
absolutely.
they would best like to be supported. I think there is still taboo attached to disclosing, menopause symptoms in the workplace. And I think especially those in sort of senior leadership positions fear it will make them look vulnerable, less
Yeah.
capable. That they will be essentially be treated differently if they talk openly about that. How do we change that narrative? How do we get to a point where, if so, and not everyone wants to talk about this, let's be fair, but
Absolutely.
if somebody wants to talk about this in the workplace, that they're not going to come up against discrimination, against bias. How do we get there? It's going to take a while.
It is going to take a while, but I think the more we normalize it, and my hope is, you may ask me this at the end, but I'll tell you now what my hope is for the future, that we are not having conversations like this because it is such a normal part of a woman or person's life that it just becomes part and parcels of women's health in the workplace, and we don't need to be having these detailed conversations about how to support, because it is just
Mm.
we just know how to support and what to do for the best. But we're not there yet. We absolutely aren't. And you're right, there is still people who don't want to talk about it. But there's a piece around leadership and leadership supporting those conversations. We launched our menopause policy with podcasts by senior leaders in our organisation who were willing to talk
Mm.
about their
So it's that
experiences.
top-down support.
Absolutely, to open up the conversation for other people. And that really, hand on heart, was probably the best thing that we did. I talked about my experiences, which, as you would imagine, were very different from the other colleague and the
Mm.
other colleague that talked about it. So we could show that it was a real variety and a very personal experience. So that top-down leadership is really important. I think that vulnerable leadership as well, to be able to say, I'm really struggling. I had a conversation with my line manager yesterday, and she said, I'm not coming into the office today because I didn't sleep and I just can't face it, so I'm going to work from home. But to be able to be that
Mm.
open and honest.
So modelling that to other people within the organisation.
Absolutely, in an organisation. And I think the third thing is allyship, and men can be such brilliant agents for change, and getting that allyship from our male colleagues is actually, it's important, and it's relatively, I'm seeing more and more of my colleagues walking towards it. And I did awareness sessions back in 2021 when we launched our policy, allyship programs, and on one of them I did a men only one, because sometimes that works because it's a safe space, it allows them to ask questions. And I had two men dial in, and one of them had dialed into the wrong call but was too embarrassed to dial off. But now I've got both internally, externally, commercially, but also with government departments as well, asking me to do those sessions, and getting, the uptake is far, far greater than it was in October 2021 for sure.
That's great. And actually, that leads me nicely onto another question. So, if there are male colleagues in an organisation who, they really want to step up and be a good ally, but perhaps they're, this kind of got to get past that sort of discomfort factor. What are the things that they can do to kind of put themselves in a good place to have conversations, to feel more confident, and also to, to make other people within the organization feel comfortable coming to talk to them about it? I know that's part of the bigger sort of culture change, but
Absolutely. And I think it is providing that safe space to ask the questions. When we do those sessions, I will say to them, the groups that attend, you can ask me anything. There is nothing, I've been really honest about my experiences in public, and there is nothing that you can say that will embarrass me. And a lot of the time they'll never see me again. So it's a great opportunity. And I've had men openly say on these calls, I just don't want to say the wrong thing. We are fundamentally scared of causing offence, upsetting somebody, and it comes from a genuinely good place. But if you don't ask the question, you'll never know the answer. So I think that's really, that education piece is really important. And then how to have that conversation, we're in a busy working environment. Take the time to make it an easy experience for the person who feels that they have to share with you. They feel, empowered to share with you, and that it's a big step. And we use the symptom checker or the balance app as a really good tool to sort of use it as a prompt to start a conversation,
we've got a
whether that's with
framework there.
a manager, a GP or a partner, to be able to say, this is how I feel, and to really start that conversation. But as a line manager, it's absolutely incumbent on you to just have that, take the time, put the time aside, find somewhere quiet, don't be rushed, and don't be trying to prompt the conversation. It can take a while, and then once somebody gets talking, often it all comes out how they're feeling, if they feel they're in a safe space. So how you frame that conversation, don't do it near the coffee machine. It is a difficult enough situation for somebody. So to have that empathetic listening is really important. So that, again, that comes from education.
Mm. Yeah, we ran a session earlier this week actually, which was a sort of an Ask a GP session, and one of the male colleagues turned up and very respectfully asked the rest of the group at the beginning if it was okay that they were there, and then went on to ask some really good questions. So
Yeah.
definitely things are changing.
And I'm seeing now that it's more intergenerational as well,
Mm,
for sure. I did one not that long, a couple of weeks ago, and we had, colleagues on there because they wanted to support their mum. I did one yesterday who, just from talking about, the different cultures, etc. And this girl on the call who actually worked in Adecco said, "My mum doesn't, English is not her first language. She hardly speaks any
mm,
English. And culturally, we don't talk about these sort of things. So she is experiencing symptoms that she can't relate to anything. She doesn't know why she feels like she does.
mm,
She just knows that she's at an age when her periods are probably going to stop very shortly. But for me to be able to take this information and sit down with her and speak to her in her own language about this, she said it is so powerful to be able to do that and to be able to educate her so she doesn't feel like she's just becoming, a different person. And she, all the different, she didn't go into the symptoms, but,
mm,
she said to be able to say to her, this is totally normal. This is perimenopause. And so she said it was such an amazing opportunity. So we're getting much more, intersectionality and richness of conversation, but we're also getting different generations being able to want to support, you know, people in their lives, which is
mm.
fantastic.
Well, and it's so important that we do learn about what might be happening before it starts
Yeah.
happening, so that we can actually
Mhm.
join the dots when we
Mm.
get there, and as well as sort of supporting other people within our lives, and that whole sort of access to support as well from a sort of socioeconomic perspective. We know that there's huge variation there. So
Mhm.
again, kind of having that support in the workplace, it is so much more important because, well,
Mm.
we're spending so much of our time there anyway, but also, yeah, if we're not necessarily getting the support outside,
Absolutely.
then if we can get it in the workplace, then maybe that's one sort of
Absolutely.
route in. Helen, thank you so much. That's maybe a good place to sort of
Yeah.
start coming to a close. But with the Menopause Employment Champion role, is that sort of for a set amount of time?
It is, yeah. It's for 18 months.
Okay.
So yeah, and I think that's a good amount of time to be able to do obviously the research and look at what I'm really clear on what I want to achieve in that period of time. So yeah, it's just about launching it, embedding it, and making sure the other two aspects of the strategy are obviously a communication plan so that employers know what is available for them, which is really important. But the other aspect of it is there are 630,000 women who are currently between 45 and 55 claiming universal credit.
Mm,
Now, all of them will be either perimenopause or menopause, or a large swathe of them. So I don't want menopause to be a barrier to them coming back into the workplace. Very hard to be out of work for any period of time, whether it's voluntary or because of redundancy,
mm,
etc. So making sure that that isn't an additional barrier is really important. And there's two ways that we're looking at that, and that is the there's a program called 50 Plus that DWP are running at the moment to help people at 50 plus get back
mm.
into the workplace, and making sure that all those coaches have got a really good understanding of menopause and how they can support their clients in job
Ah,
centre
interesting.
with information, etc., to break down those barriers and support them back into work. But also, it's really important that employers are menopause friendly, because if I was out of work and I was looking for a role and I was going through perimenopause, I would naturally want to look for an employer who was supportive. So looking at the menopause pledge and helping employers to sign up to that pledge as well, to make it easier for people who are out of work to come back into the workplace, because I fully believe that this isn't this period of time in a woman's life is not a time when they need to step down, step back, or step out of the workplace. This will happen to 51% of the population, and if we can support them and manage it for the 25% who have really severe symptoms and the 50% that have some symptoms, if we can make that the best experience it can be through education, support, allyship, that will allow a woman to go on and have arguably the best 10, 15, 20 years of a career after that.
Couldn't agree more. We're just getting started.
Absolutely, we are.
Oh, Helen, thank you so much. It was lovely to unpack all of that with you, and I look forward to seeing the fruits of all of your labour coming to the fore over the next year and a half. And yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Emma. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.